The Lazarus Protocol. The air in the makeshift operating theater was a suffocating cocktail of antiseptic, blood, and the ever-present, cloying sweetness of decomposing hope. Dr. Evelyn Hayes, Ev, to the ghosts who haunted this forgotten corner of a shattered nation, moved with a brittle, practiced economy, her scalpel a sliver of indifferent moonlight in the dim, generator-powered glare. Beneath her hands, a child, no older than 7, lay like a broken doll, his small chest a ruin of shrapnel and scorched earth. This was Tuesday. Or perhaps Wednesday. Time, like morality, had become a fluid, irrelevant concept in the Ismaili Free Zone. Beside her, Nico Andrick, their local fixer, translator, and purveyor of impossible necessities, murmured reassurances in the boy's native dialect, his voice a low, hypnotic cadence against the chaotic percussion of distant shelling. His eyes, dark and unreadable as a desert night, met Ev's over the surgical mask. It was a look that had become their silent language in this abattoir of good intentions, a shared acknowledgement of the futility, the sheer, grinding horror of their Lazarus Protocol, their daily, often failed, attempts to snatch souls back from the void. But tonight, in that fractional, blood-soaked glance, there was something more. A spark of shared exhaustion so profound it felt like a perverse intimacy, a flicker of something that went beyond the sterile camaraderie of the damned. It was a dangerous ember, and Ev, a woman who prided herself on her scorched earth emotional landscape, felt an unwelcome warmth stir in the ashes of her soul. This relentless dance with death, in a land where life is cheaper than a handful of spent cartridges, what does it do to the human spirit? Does it ennoble or does it merely strip away the veneer of civilization, revealing the raw, desperate animal beneath? I invite you to delve into this abyss with us and share your own stark truths in the comments below. If you find a grim resonance in these unflinching chronicles of human extremity, demonstrate your solidarity by liking this video. Subscribe to our channel for more dispatches from the frontiers of despair, and activate the notification bell. You won't want to miss the harrowing testimonies yet to come. Your viewership is a testament to the stories that must be told. F. Hayes had once been a believer in the Hippocratic Oath, in the inherent goodness of humanity, in the power of her skilled hands to mend and heal. That faith had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, casualty by casualty, across a dozen God-forsaken postings from sub-Saharan Africa to the shattered remnants of the Levant. Her marriage back in the sterile, ordered world of suburban Boston had been an early casualty, a slow, anemic death by 1,000 paper cuts of neglect and diverging paths. Her ex-husband, Richard, a man who now existed only as a polite, distant signature on alimony checks, had called her work a savior complex. Perhaps he was right, but the saving she now knew was a lie. There was only the brief, brutal postponement of the inevitable. Nico Andrick was a product of this broken land, a chameleon sculpted by conflict and loss. He'd been a university student before the Great Correction, as the warlords euphemistically termed the Civil War. Now he was whatever the situation demanded, a silver-tongued negotiator for safe passage, a black market surgeon for medical supplies that inexplicably vanished from official NGO stockpiles, a purveyor of gallows humor that kept the local staff from succumbing entirely to despair. He moved through the dangerous, shifting allegiances of Asmiel with a survivor's predatory grace, his loyalties ambiguous, his moral compass seemingly demagnetized by the sheer magnetic pull of staying alive. He was handsome in a lean, hawkish way, his youth hardened by an old man's weary cynicism. He was also, Ev had begun to realize with a disquieting clarity, the only person in this desolate outpost who truly saw her, not as Dr. Hayes, chief surgeon, but as Ev, a woman teetering on the brink of her own internal collapse. The NGO compound, a collection of sandbag prefabs and flapping canvas, was an island of precarious order in a sea of chaos. Days were a relentless blur of triage, surgery, and the gnawing ache of futility. Nights were worse. The generators would cough and die, plunging them into a primordial darkness filled with the sounds of distant gunfire, the cries of the wounded, and the closer, more insidious whispers of Ev's own demons. Sleep was a battlefield, peopled by the accusing ghosts of patients she'd lost, their faces blurring with Richard's polite, disappointed frown. The inciting spark, the true beginning of their descent, was deceptively small. A critical shipment of pediatric antibiotics, vital for staving off a cholera outbreak in the nearby refugee camp, had vanished. Bureaucracy, corruption, outright theft, the reasons were irrelevant. The children would die. Ev had raged, had thrown her instruments, had wept tears of pure, unadulterated fury in the privacy of her sweltering tent, a display of emotion so raw it had shocked even herself. Nico had found her there, not with platitudes, but with a quiet, almost feral intensity in his eyes. "There is a way, Doctor," he'd said, his voice a low conspiratorial murmur. "But it requires flexibility." His flexibility involved a clandestine nighttime meeting with a local militia commander, a man whose hands were stained with the blood of his own people. It involved a donation from the NGO's already stretched fuel reserves, and a blind eye turned to the origin of the medication when it miraculously appeared at dawn. Ev had signed the release forms, her hand steady, her conscience a dull, throbbing ache. The children would live. For now. That night, Nico had brought her a bottle of fiery, unlabeled local spirits. They drank it sitting on upturned ammunition crates outside her tent, the stars blazing with an indifferent brilliance in the vast, dark sky. "To flexibility, Doctor," he toasted, his lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "To survival, Nico," she'd countered, the alcohol searing a path down her throat, a welcome burn. Their conversation that night was not about the mission or the ethics of their recent transaction. It was about the ghosts that haunted them, the pieces of themselves they'd lost along the way in their respective wars. He spoke of his family, lost in an early bombing raid. His words flat, devoid of self-pity, a simple recitation of unbearable facts. Ev, in turn, found herself speaking of Richard, of the slow, silent unraveling of their love, a story she hadn't realized she still carried like a stone in her gut. His hand, calloused and surprisingly warm, had covered hers where it rested on the rough wood of the crate. "We are all just trading damages, yes, Ev," he'd murmured, his use of her first name a subtle, significant shift. "Trying to find a currency that still has value in a bankrupt world." The touch was not sexual, not then. But it was an anchor, a moment of profound, unexpected human connection in the abject desolation of their shared reality. It was also, she would later realize, the first step onto a very slippery, very dangerous slope. The Lazarus Protocol wasn't just about raising the dead. It was about what happened when the miracle workers themselves began to die inside. The stress fractures in Ev's carefully constructed world began to spiderweb. The proximity of Nico, the shared secret of their morally ambiguous triumph with the antibiotics, created a new, charged dynamic between them. He was no longer just the fixer, he was a confidant, a co-conspirator, the only other person who understood the particular shade of gray they now inhabited. His presence in the ore, once merely functional, became a strange source of comfort. His low murmurs to the patients a counterpoint to the metallic click of her instruments, his occasional, fleeting touch as he passed her a clamp or a suture sending an illicit jolt through her. The nights were the worst. The compound, after the last generator sputtered out, would be plunged into a thick, velvety darkness, the silence broken only by the chirr of unseen insects and the distant, sporadic pop-pop-pop of small arms fire. A sound that had become as commonplace as birdsong. Ev would lie on her cot, the cheap local alcohol doing little to quiet the screaming in her head. It was on one such night, after a particularly brutal day where they'd lost 3 children to a landmine, that the dam finally broke. She'd found herself outside his tent, a half-empty bottle in her hand, her shadow long and distorted in the moonlight. He wasn't surprised to see her. He never seemed surprised by anything. He simply held the tent flap open. His small space was Spartan, yet somehow more human than her own sterile quarters. A worn rug on the packed earth floor, a single, flickering candle, the scent of strong, bitter coffee, and something else, the faint, musky aroma of him. They didn't speak for a long time, just passed the bottle back and forth, the silence a heavy, pregnant thing between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of the children they couldn't save, with the crushing weight of their shared, unending proximity to death. Sometimes Eve finally whispered, her voice hoarse, raw, "I think I'm already dead, Nico. Just a machine going through the motions." He looked at her then, his dark eyes holding an unnerving intensity in the candlelight. "No, Eve. You are not dead. You just ache for a different kind of life." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the deep lines of exhaustion etched around her mouth. His touch was tentative, yet it ignited a firestorm within her, a desperate, clawing need for sensation, for oblivion, for a single moment of feeling something other than the gnawing emptiness. "The desire to feel," he murmured, his face very close to hers now, his breath warm, smelling of cheap spirits and something uniquely Nico. "It is a powerful medicine, yes? Or a powerful poison?" She didn't know which it was. She didn't care. All she knew was the crushing weight of her loneliness, the unbearable lightness of her own being in this vast, indifferent charnel house. Her training, her vows, her marriage, however dead, the faces of her children she would never have, it all receded, a distant, meaningless shore. There was only this man, this moment, this desperate, shared plunge into the abyss. When his lips found hers, it was not a kiss of tenderness, but of a mutual savage need. It was a raw, brutal coupling, there on the packed earth floor of his tent, a desperate affirmation of life in the very maw of death. His body was lean, hard, a survivor's frame, and she clung to him as if he were the last solid thing in a world dissolving into chaos. There was no beauty in it, no romance, only a stark, almost animalistic urgency. Each thrust, each gasp, was a defiance hurled against the encroaching darkness, a frantic attempt to reclaim some small, stolen piece of their own humanity, even if it was through an act that stripped them further of their civilized veneers. It was a grotesque parody of intimacy, a danse macabre performed by two souls already deeply, irrevocably damned. This was not a healing nor an escape. It was merely a deeper descent into the shared, consuming fire of their desolation. The Lazarus Protocol had claimed its practitioners. The affair with Nico became Eve's secret, shameful solace, a dark undercurrent to the daily litany of suffering and death. Their trysts were furtive, desperate, snatched and stolen moments in abandoned outbuildings, in the suffocating confines of a supply closet, once even in the back of a non-functioning ambulance, the scent of stale blood and antiseptic a perverse incense to their profane rites. Each encounter was a fresh betrayal of her vows, to Richard, to Hippocrates, to herself, of the mission, of the desperate hope in her patient's eyes. Yet, each act also brought a fleeting, searing illusion of being alive, a raw, visceral connection that was as addictive as it was destructive. She found herself seeing patience through a haze of sleeplessness and suppressed desire. Her hands, usually so steady, sometimes trembling with a fine, almost imperceptible tremor. During surgeries, Nico's presence beside her was a constant erotic hum, his low voice translating a family's grief or a patient's fear, while his eyes would meet hers with a look of illicit, shared knowledge that made her stomach clench. She started making small, almost unconscious errors in her charting, misplacing instruments, her mind a battleground between professional duty and a consuming personal chaos. Nico, too, was changed, or perhaps he was merely revealed. The charm remained, but now it was often underscored by a possessive glint in his eye, a subtle assertion of ownership. He would procure comforts for her, a bar of chocolate from a UN ration, a clean t-shirt, A few hours of uninterrupted generator power for her tenth small luxuries in this desolate landscape, each a silken thread in the web he was weaving around her. Was it care? Or was it control? Ev no longer knew, or perhaps no longer cared. She was adrift, her moral compass spinning wildly, her only lodestar the dark, intense pull of this man who understood her brokenness because he was equally, if differently, fractured. Her shadow self was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, a ravenous beast demanding to be fed. In a world stripped bare by chaos and despair, do the old rules of morality still apply? Or does survival in all its forms, including the desperate craving for human connection, create its own terrible, immutable ethics? Cast your vote in the poll of your conscience and share your verdict in the comments. The compound was a small, insular world, and secrets like infections had a way of spreading. A knowing glance from a local nurse, a too long silence from a fellow expatriate doctor after finding Ev and Nico emerging from the same shadowed alleyway. The whispers started subtle at first, then more insistent. Dr. Hayes, the stoic, tireless surgeon, was compromised. The mission director, a perpetually harassed Belgian named Dr. Vermeulen, a man who had seen it all and whose face was a roadmap of disillusionment, called Evan to his makeshift office, a shipping container converted with a desk and 2 plastic chairs. "Evelyn," he began, his voice weary, not accusatory, which was somehow worse. "There are rumors about you and Mr. Andrick." Ev met his gaze, her face a carefully constructed mask of professional composure. "Rumors are inevitable in a place like this, Director." "Indeed." Vermeulen sighed, rubbing his temples. "But some rumors have teeth. Your work, Evelyn, it has always been exemplary. Recently, however," he let the sentence hang, a silent indictment. "Nico Andrick is a valuable asset, but he is also a complicated individual. His loyalties are to survival, Evelyn. His own first and foremost." It wasn't a direct accusation, but the warning was clear. The Lazarus Protocol was about saving lives, not about personal entanglements that could jeopardize the fragile balance of their operation. Ev left the container, the desert sun feeling like a physical blow, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. The web was tightening. The inevitable catastrophe arrived not with a bang, but with the insidious whisper of a failing generator and a child's fading pulse. A new wave of fighting had erupted in a northern village, sending a fresh torrent of wounded flooding into their ill-equipped facility. Ev had been operating for 18 hours straight, fueled by caffeine, adrenaline, and the gnawing illicit hunger for Nico that was now a constant companion. Nico was supposed to have secured a new shipment of blood bags, O negative, desperately needed, from a Red Crescent convoy that morning. He was late. Hours late. The child on her table, a girl with shrapnel in her abdomen, was bleeding out. "Where the hell is he, Ev?" roared McAllister, the gruff Irish anesthetist, his face pale beneath his surgical mask. "This kid doesn't have minutes." Ev barked into her radio, her voice cracking with fatigue and a rising panic. No answer. She knew with a sickening certainty where Nico likely was. He'd mentioned a side deal earlier, something about procuring generator parts from a contact in a nearby town. A town that also happened to house a discreet establishment where a man could forget his troubles for an hour or two. He'd promised to be quick. He'd looked at her with that familiar, knowing glint in his eye, a silent invitation for a later private debrief. And she, lost in her own labyrinth of desire and exhaustion, hadn't pressed him, hadn't insisted on the urgency of the blood supply. The girl died on the table. Her small hand, which Ev had briefly held, went limp, her eyes staring up at the tattered canvas roof with a terrible vacant accusation. At that precise moment, Nico strolled in nonchalant, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Apologies, doctor. The roads were difficult. He saw the still form on the table, the grim faces of McAllister and the nurses. His expression flickered, but only for a second. The blood. Ev's voice was a dead thing. Ah yes. Some complications, but I have it now. He held up the bag. McAllister swore, a string of Gaelic curses that were almost a prayer of despair. Ev simply stared at Nico, the full weight of her complicity, her catastrophic failure, crashing down on her. It wasn't just the girl. It was everything. Her oath. Her mission. The last tattered remnants of her own soul. The exposure was brutal, swift. McAllister, a man of fierce integrity despite his abrasive exterior, reported the incident, including Ev's distracted, near-negligent oversight and Nico's unexplained, fatal delay. There was a cursory investigation. Ev didn't defend herself. There was no defense. She was on a transport plane out of Asmil within 48 hours, her career in ruins, her passport stamped with a quiet, damning services no longer required. Nico, she heard, had vanished the same day, disappearing back into the fractured, lawless landscape that had forged him. A ghost leaving no trace but the faint scent of betrayal and cheap spirits. Ev Hayes returned to a Boston that felt alien. A world of manicured lawns and polite, meaningless conversations. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the laughter, the distant sirens were a constant, jarring assault after the profound, deathly silences of Asmil. Richard, when she dutifully informed him of her return and disgrace, had offered a cool, predictable "I told you so," masked as concern. She tried to resume a normal life, but Asmil had stained her too deeply. The Lazarus Protocol had failed, and in its failure, it had resurrected something terrible within her, something she could no longer exorcise. She would wake in the night, her sheets soaked with sweat, the phantom scent of antiseptic and Nico's skin clinging to her, the ghost of a dying child's hand in hers. There was no redemption, no healing, only the stark, unending echo of her choices in a land where life and death, morality and survival, had become a single indistinguishable blur. The desert had claimed a part of her, and the void it left behind was a wound that would never truly close. When you stare into the abyss of human suffering for too long and that abyss begins to stare back into you, altering the very fabric of your soul, what part of yourself is ultimately, irrevocably sacrificed? Can anyone truly emerge from such darkness unchanged? Or are we all just trading one form of desolation for another? Share your deepest reflections, your starkest truths in the comments section below. We are here to listen. Thank you for undertaking this harrowing journey into the heart of desolation with us. If this story's unflinching gaze resonated with your own understanding of the human condition, please administer a like to this video, subscribe to our channel for more raw and unfiltered narratives from the front lines of existence, and activate the emergency beacon, the notification bell, so you're immediately alerted to our next dispatch from the void. Your support is the lifeline that allows these vital stories to be told. We are immensely grateful for your presence and your courage to bear witness. May your own path be illuminated by a kinder light.